Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. Today, the title of the presentation is Invulnerability, which will be given to us by our own Shobha Sharma. Before we begin, we'll do a reading, and this is from Light on the Path. To be incapable of tears is to have faced and conquered the simple human nature, and to have attained an equilibrium which cannot be shaken by personal emotions. It does not imply any hardness of heart or any indifference. It does not imply the exhaustion of sorrow when the suffering soul seems powerless to suffer acutely any longer. It does not mean the deadness of old age when emotion is becoming dull because the strings which vibrate to it are wearing out. None of these conditions are fit for a disciple. And if any one of them exists in him, it must be overcome before the path can be entered upon. Hardness of heart belongs to the selfish man, the egotist, to whom the gate is forever closed. Indifference belongs to the fool and the false philosopher, those whose lukewarmness makes them mere puppets not strong enough to face the realities of existence. When pain or sorrow has worn out the keenness of suffering, the result is a lethargy not unlike that which accompanies old age, as it is usually experienced by men and women. Such a condition makes the entrance to the path impossible, because the first step is one of difficulty and needs a strong man full of psychic and physical vigor to attempt it. Okay. We give you our very own Shobha Sharma.
Thank you so much, Monica. I'll come back to those words later, but let me first start by saying, dear friends, the subject is invulnerability. And just 2 days back, I lost a dear, wonderful mentor and teacher of chemistry in India. I had gone to India in December and actually January, February, and I went to see him with a couple of the students who had been working with him. 4 of us, we went to see him. He was very sick and we knew he would die any moment. The one thing he kept saying when he saw us was, "Who are you?" It was very painful to see that, but later when I went home, I kept thinking about those words. Who am I? Who are you? Reminded me of who am I? What am I here for? And it is interesting that today I'm talking about invulnerability, which makes us examine who we are. This is also a time of renewal in April. Many people finished celebrating Easter. Others celebrated Passover, and still others celebrated Ramadan. Also, it's a celebration of a new year for some of us who come from South India, because we are in the new month called Chitrai or Chaitra in the north, for those of us who follow the solar lunar calendar. Why is this important? As students of theosophy, we are actively aware of cycles. And we are in the spring equinox, and the Earth is moving upwards in its elliptical orbit around the sun, a time of new beginnings, a wonderful time to explore the quality of invulnerability, an appropriate period to question who we really are. But before I even begin this topic, this 15-lettered word needs to be examined a little. I'm going to start with its antonym, its opposite, vulnerable. Vulnerable comes from the Latin word vulnus, which means wound. So that basically implies the word vulnerable means capable of being wounded. So now, to understand both words, vulnerable and invulnerable, let us contextualize it by reading the beginning passage from the voice of the silence. For when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams. When he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound that kills the outer. Then only, not till then, shall he forsake the region of Asat, the false, to come unto the realm of Sat, the true. Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshly eyes be rendered blind to all illusion. Before the soul can hear, the image man has to become as deaf to roarings as to whispers, to cries of bellowing elephants, as to the silvery buzzing of the golden firefly. Before the soul can comprehend and may remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united, just as the form to which the clay is modeled is first united with the potter's mind. For then the soul will hear and will remember, and then to the inner voice will speak, the voice of the silence, and say, if thy soul smiles while bathing in the sunlight of thy life, if thy soul sings within a chrysalis of flesh and matter, if thy soul weeps inside a castle of illusion, if thy soul struggles to break the silver thread that binds her to the master, know, O disciple, thy soul is of the earth. When to the world's turmoil thy budding soul lends ear, when to the roaring voice of the great illusion thy soul responds, when frightened by the hot tears of pain, when deafened by the cries of distress, thy soul withdraws like the shy turtle within the carapace of selfhood. Learn, O disciple, of her silent God, thy soul is an unworthy shrine. When waxing stronger, thy soul glides forth from a secure retreat and breaking loose from a protective shrine, extends her silver thread and rushes onward. When beholding her image on the waves of space, she whispers, this is I. Declare, O disciple, that thy soul is caught in the webs of delusion. I know it's a very long passage, but we see in this passage both a description of vulnerability and invulnerability. The last three paragraphs, when we talked about the soul, it was all about vulnerability. Whereas the rest of the paragraphs, till the title of the book in capital letters, Voice of the Silence, indicates what one must do to be invulnerable. So, how does one get to the invulnerable stage? Actually, even before this reading, there is a hint given to us. So, it says in the Voice of the Silence, just before this, the mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. And then it talks about when to himself his form appears unreal, etc., etc. And then it talks about the invulnerable part of how the soul can see and hear and comprehend. Now, it's interesting that the Voice of the Silence starts with the mind is the great slayer of the real. and the disciple needs to slay the slayer, because Patanjali's Yoga Sutras echo the same sentiment right at the outset, with the second sutra saying, Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which William Quanch Judge beautifully translates as, concentration of yoga is the hindering of the modifications of the thinking principles. And he has a long note. I'm not going to read the whole note. I'm just going to read a part of it. He says, in other words, the want of concentration of thought is due to the fact that the mind, here called the thinking principle, is subject to constant modifications by reason of it being diffused over a multiplicity of subjects. And then it continues to talk about the modifications of the mind. Talks about sleep, dream, fancy, right cognition, and incorrect cognition as the 5 modifications. And then he adds, William Conjudge adds that the whole of the 4 padas or chapters of this little book hinges on this idea. So this is the most important thing to remember about the mind. And then Sutra 12 in the first chapter says that the hindering of the modifications of the mind can be achieved by exercise and dispassion. What is meant by exercise? Exercise is the discipline evoked through meditation and constant application throughout the day, and dispassion is a virtue that needs to be cultivated. A few months back, we had a series of Aquarian series lectures on the 7 paramitas of perfection. And dispassion resonates with the middle paramita, the 4th paramita, called viraga. And let us again remind ourselves what the viraga virtue is defined as in the voice of the silence. Viraga, indifference to pain or pleasure, illusion conquered, truth alone perceived. Very much akin to dispassion. Now, in the world we live in, it is very easy to feel depressed and dejected by things going around us, and we may ask ourselves, how do we remain invulnerable when there is genocide in Gaza, when the climate crisis gets worse and worse because of man's disregard of the ecosystem, and refugees from different countries have no place to go? I could list so many other ills that we are going through, but suffice it is to say that life as we see it and experience it appears to be overwhelming and miserable. The first 3 sentences in the long quotation from the voice of the silence gives us another clue. It talks about Sat and Asat. So, Sat is the real and Asat is the false. About a year ago, in March 2024, there was a very interesting article in the New York Review of Books called The Trouble with Reality, written by Megan O. Gleblin, and she reviews a book by William Edgington called The Rigor of Angels. And it talks about 3 people and discusses the ultimate nature of reality. I definitely need to read it again to enjoy and savor the fact that modern thinking is moving closer and closer to what occultism, Vedanta, or ancient wisdom, or theosophy has been saying about reality. It talks about how this mind that we have, and Megan starts out with this, a quotation from the brothers Karamazov saying, the impotent and the infinitely small Euclidean mind of man. Edgington, in this book that is being reviewed, talks about the problems and paradoxes we face when we try to extend our thinking beyond space and time. He uses the triad of the 3 men to opine. Immanuel Kant, a philosopher, he calls these paradoxes antinomies, and they arise when we eject ourselves beyond space and time, imagining earthly life from an eternal perspective. Then there is Heisenberg, the scientist, who talked at the subatomic level, saying that the laws of Newtonian physics break down as one tries to understand where the electron is at a given point, and can only talk in terms of the uncertainty principle. Because the very instruments we use to measure cannot pinpoint position and momentum at the same time. Jose Luis Borges, the Latin American writer from Argentina, explored in his novels on motifs like dreams, labyrinths, chance, and infinity, to name a few subjects. The subject of dreams reminds one of what a Chinese philosopher once said: I dreamt I was a butterfly, and when I woke up, I didn't know if I was a butterfly or a human being. So this goes to show how little we understand ourselves in reality. When we explore invulnerability and its close relative viraga, let us never imagine that this quality is cold and indifferent. There is compassion, love, and understanding there all the time, since the second part of the definition of viraga also says, illusion conquered, truth alone perceived. We just had a beautiful reading by Monica from The Light on the Path. The Light on the Path is a delightful little book written by MC Mabel Collins. And the writer says, right at the beginning, before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears. And I remember wondering about that sentence when I first heard it, when I was very, very young. And so the reading that Monica read tells us that to be incapable of tears, one should have conquered the simple human nature and attained an equilibrium, cannot be shaken by personal emotions. It does not imply any hardness of heart or any indifference. It does not imply any exhaustion of sorrow. It does not mean the deadness of old age. So, invulnerability, now we know, definitely does not imply inaction. Invulnerability implies compassion, hope, and true joy. But at the same time, it isn't invulnerable behavior when one blocks one's emotions and true feelings and puts on the appearance of control. Then we have reached the region of asat, the false. Somewhere in the voice of the silence, there is a phrase, bend like reeds but never break. That's close enough to being invulnerable. But to me personally, the most lovable story is of the famous lovable story about invulnerability is the story of the famous Titan in Greek mythology, Prometheus. I think most of us know the story, but it bears repeating. Prometheus is the son of Iapetus, a Titan and a brother of Atlas, who's supposed to have the whole world on his shoulders. So Prometheus is initially a friend of Zeus, who becomes the god of the Olympus by defeating the Titans. Prometheus, who can foresee the future, and H.P. Blavatsky on page 413 of the second volume of The Secret Doctrine says, Prometheus, meaning he who sees before him. And in the first footnote on that page, she breaks it into two Greek words, pro and metes, which means for and thought, forethought. He warns the Titans before the defeat to make peace with Zeus, because he knows they will lose. They scorn and they don't listen to his advice. So Prometheus stands by Zeus. Initially, Zeus is the beneficent ruler called by Homer the father of gods and men. However, this may sound familiar to some of you. Having accrued power, Zeus becomes an authority figure, drawing all the reins of power in his hand, recognizing no law but his own. If he treats the other gods with disdain, imagine how humans down below were treated. Prometheus is dismayed because he knows that men are capable of better things and a better life. Defying Zeus, the god of Olympus, Prometheus steals quote unquote fire and gives it to the humans suffering on earth. Zeus is so angry with this defiance and theft that he sends Prometheus to the Caucasus and orders his henchmen to bind him in chains and sends an eagle to eat his liver every day after it grows anew in the morning. A horrific torture for helping mankind. H.P. Blavatsky interprets this story based on the great Greek playwright Aeschylus, or maybe it's Aeschylus, drama called Prometheus Bound. I shall relate the story of Prometheus as interpreted by Aeschylus and parts of H.P. Blavatsky's esoteric interpretation. So I'm now referring to the play that was created by this great Greek playwright, Aeschylus. The play opens in the mountains of Scythia, northern part of the old Greco-Roman Empire. In the play, Prometheus is bound and is shown as represented by a huge wooden effigy before the second punishment of the eagle eating his liver, which doesn't come in this play. So who does the dirty work of binding and leaving him there? Three of Zeus' followers. Hephaestus, the Greek god of artisans, or Vulcan, as he is called in Roman, is an unwilling participant, along with two very willing participants called Kratos and Bia, demons of force and strength, respectively. One of the demons, Kratos, speaks harshly to Hephaestus to carry out the task. So unwillingly, he strikes the hammer and finishes the dreary task to binding Prometheus. So the play starts with this dramatic beginning. As soon as his tormentors depart, Prometheus begins his soliloquy. Mother Earth beneath my feet, and the sun who sees it all. And he calls them by name to bear witness to the unrighteousness upon him. However, knowing his knowledge of past, present, and future, he assures himself that things could change for the better in the distant future. As he ponders, the daughters of the ocean, the nymphs, arrive. They are also, incidentally, the chorus. Chorus is an essential part of all Greek plays, as most of you know. Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus use the chorus. So the chorus arrives, and the chorus initially say that their hearts are with him, and they speak not very kindly about Zeus's behavior. He informs them why he is here and bound and says, and I'm quoting from The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 413. Grievous to suffer, piteous to behold, I who did mortals pity. The chorus remarking very pertinently, vast boon was this that thou gavest unto mortals. Prometheus answers, yeah, and besides, 'twas I that gave them fire. Chorus, have now these short-lived creatures flame-eyed fires? Prometheus, aye, and by it full many arts will learn. And here Prometheus shares a secret about the future, saying obliquely that he will be liberated by the son of Zeus eons later. HPB makes some statements about who Prometheus really was on page 411 to 412 of the same volume 2, The Secret Doctrine. She states, our saviors, the Agnishwata Pitris, the solar fathers, and other divine sons of the flame of wisdom, personified by the Greeks in Prometheus, may well, in the injustice of the human heart, be left unrecognized and unthanked. She continues regarding the secret that he will be bound in suffering, page 413, until the day until Prometheus is released by his heaven-appointed deliverer, Heracles. Heracles is actually Hercules. Now we go back to the play. Prometheus requests the chorus, the daughters of the ocean, to visit Earth to see mortals. They depart, but stay close to the stage, and now on the scene appears their father, Ocean. He is a conformist and follows Zeus's orders, even if Zeus is a tyrant. He comes to offer sympathy and advice and gives him words of caution not to defy the ruler. Prometheus, realizing that Ocean wishes to be a mediator, gently but firmly states that he does not need one, and Ocean leaves perhaps in a huff, but disappointed. The chorus laments again his condition, and here Prometheus elaborates a little more on his secret, saying he will be saved by a son born to Zeus. They try pressing him to say more, but he does not reveal much. By that time, he has his third visitor, Io, daughter of Inachus, pursued by Zeus in an amorous way, and therefore persecuted by Zeus' wife, Juno or Hera, and turned into a heifer, a young cow, and also tormented by a gadfly. She comes to see Prometheus and has a lot of empathy for him, as she herself is going through a lot of pain and misery. He who can see the future tells her to travel far and reach the Indus Valley in India. HPB's interpretation of the word Nile River mentioned here. And also about the final Kalki avatar that should come to liberate humanity at the end of the Kali Yuga. This is again H.P. Blavatsky's interpretation of the wanderings of Io, directed by Prometheus. She calls her the perfect number 10. Finally, Hermes comes as the messenger of Zeus and lectures Prometheus to conform and listen to Zeus and urges him to tell him more about the secret. But see, Zeus already had his spies to let him know about this. Prometheus is invulnerable and refuses to conform, even when Hermes says that he will suffer more with an eagle sent by Zeus to tear his liver every day. The far-seeing Prometheus is not shaken and is indifferent to all the pain and suffering that will continue. Hermes leaves. The play ends with the remonstrances from the chorus and Prometheus saying that he knows all and is willing to bear all. H.P. Blavatsky, talking about this in the same pages in The Secret Doctrine, says this Aeschylus, or like the Greeks say, Aeschylus, was an initiate as well, far-seeing as Prometheus himself. And she notes that the story of Prometheus is more ancient than this play. She portrays Prometheus as the invulnerable part of the guardian wall, the Agnishwata Pitris, the rebels who were willing to suffer and fall to help in the lighting up of Manas to the mindless men of the third race. Yet man himself is the Prometheus because he has allowed the lighting up of Manas and defiled it by not working with the higher but with the lower Manas and letting his carnal, karmic desires, a symbol of the eagle that eats his liver every day, to take reign. This is the real fall of man. However, Prometheus also symbolizes hope and compassion to get to self-conscious godhood by the end of the Kali Yuga, where full enlightenment is embodied in the symbology of the final avatar of Vishnu. It would be remiss if I did not quote what HBB has to say on page 420 of the second volume of The Secret Doctrine, where she says, after she says all this, there is one eternal law in nature, one that always tends to adjust contraries and to produce final harmony. It is owing to this law of spiritual development superseding the physical and purely intellectual that mankind will become freed from its false gods and find itself finally self-redeemed. The questions I asked about invulnerability have been answered by the myth of Prometheus. Each one has to decide how to interpret it. But as the Beatles song says, it's a long and winding road to understand who we really are and why we are on this pilgrimage. I would like to end with one of my favorite quotations by H.P. Blavatsky on page 40, volume 1 of The Secret Doctrine, which needs to be understood and remembered for the candidate for woe throughout the cycles may not deviate from the path. Many of you have probably heard this from me many times. Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities. And the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, each advance bringing with it the idea that now at last we have reached reality. But only when we shall have reached the absolute consciousness and blended our own with it, shall we be free from the delusions produced by Maya. So Prometheus wasn't created in a day. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you very much, Shobha. You've taken us on a wonderful tour through myth, through esoteric thought, and through our own natures, if we can only grasp that. And so this idea of vulnerability, as expressed in all of the references and teachings that you've cited, clearly is an inspiration for us in terms of individual practice. So do we have any questions on this journey, on this idea, on this process, on this awakening? And while everyone is warming up, we can throw out a question. Since we are, but we are not Prometheus, how do we work consciously to recognize the invulnerability state of our being?
How do we work? I'm going to try to say this as I would when a big problem is given in mathematics. A teacher usually breaks it up to small pieces and gives smaller examples, right? So, to me, the first thing I think of is when everything seems to be going to pieces around us. Whatever may be happening, it could be out politically, it could be something happening within us, it could be anything. How do we remain invulnerable? I think, especially for students of theosophy, we need to practice what we preach. We read all our devotional books. We talk a lot about all these wonderful paramita virtues. We talk about words from the voice, like I did today. But I think the most important thing is if we can start out in a small way to do what we can to remain in equilibrium. Try to do stuff that we can within our own circles. Uh, and we don't have to go around rebelling. That was remarkable what Prometheus did. I was talking to my son about this, and he said, what an anti capitalist he was. And I found that very interesting that he should say that. I think what he meant is that he wasn't interested in anything. He did it because he had to do it. So I think we start in a small way to do what we can to help people when things look impossible, when we feel like we are breaking apart. And we also need to take care of ourselves. We need to make sure we are strong and we learn to do things that we can help others. So I think being invulnerable is not easy. That's why I read that from page 40 of The Secret Doctrine. This road is hard. This is a road with thorns on it. It's a long and winding road. I love that song by the Beatles, by the way. And it just reminds me that nothing can be done without effort on our part. Nothing can be done without work on our part. But at the same time, it can be joyous, it can be fun. It doesn't have to be terrifying, it doesn't have to be. So that's why I say start small. Like a math teacher would say, make the problem small. So start out by doing little acts that you can around you and not throw up your hands and say, why is life like this? I can't deal with it.
Okay, great. So much for the soul in the voice of the silence smiling. Yes, Maluka.
Hello. Very
Hi.
profound.
Thank you.
I think I think we're silent because it was impacting. Yeah, a lot to digest. I'm talking about what you just said just a second ago about Mother Teresa used to say, and I have said this before, do small things with great joy. You know, and I think that's what sometimes we are afraid to do things and we think, oh, but it doesn't mean much. But that's how you start, you know, you do it with great love, even though it's small. And then the other thought is that, you know, we are tested all the time. And I think humanity globally, and especially in the United States, we're going to a lot of upheavals. And it's just interesting how people react. I think a lot of Prometheus are going on right now, trying to do the best they can. But it's amazing how people got together and more united in crisis.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe that's part of the growing. It's like waking up people. Like, you know, we're too comfortable. We think everything is okay. But how can do we need to go through this pain and suffering, all these upheavals, in order to continue to grow spiritually? Or is it something else that we need to learn?
No, the reason I told the story of Prometheus is not just because I liked that story and I liked what my son said about it, but I think I love the fact that his name himself means he has forethought. What does that mean? He knows the past, the present, and the future. And I thought of the Ramayana and the story of Garuda, son Jatayu. Both of them could see everything. They knew the ultimate divisions of time. They could see everything. So I think of myself climbing up a mountain or being in a plane and looking at the world. The view that you have then is so different from the view you have when you're in it, right? I mean, that's an analogy I'm using to describe. When I get on the clouds in the plane, or if I were an eagle and I could soar high and I could see the world, everything looks so minute. All my problems look small. And I think that's the kind of a view when you can see it all, when you can see the past, present, and future. That's what Prometheus was. He said, yes, I'm suffering now. It's okay. But in the long run, it doesn't matter. I think that's the beauty of the story of Prometheus. Yeah, I'm suffering now. Yes, my liver is going every day. I mean, the very thought of that whole thing is ghoulish and horrendous. But look at his attitude. I mean, that's again Aeschylus, or I should say Aeschylus, like the Greeks say, Aeschylus' vision of who he was, his imagination, and he was an initiate, according to H.P. Blavatsky. So again, he was also far-seeing as the playwright. So I think that is what we need to be working on. I go back to a story written by that Australian writer, I'm forgetting his name, Neville Shute, where it's called The Checkerboard, in which he discovers that he has a bullet in his brain and he could die soon. So he says, it'll all be the same in 100 years. So that attitude of willing to accept what is happening. I don't say it's easy. It's something, but it can be cultivated. Um, you know, uh, it's something that we all need to be striving for, and not let things. If we had problems with the internet and everything, it's okay. It's no big deal. I had sent Jonathan my text so he could have read it, right? So it's not the end of the world. So I think I'm just saying, we need to be able to look at the big picture. And we don't, believe me, I'm the first one to panic at the drop of a hat. So I have to learn. I have to learn to slow down and breathe and think before I act. And I just hope that when I say all this, I can apply it. It's not just words.
Great, thank you. And it's another weird thought we don't often think about when we are either in pain or witnessing pain. But at the very same moment that we are in pain or witnessing pain, or someone we love is in pain, or someone we hate is in pain, there's joy around the world. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there's death, there's birth around the world. Mm-hmm. So, depending upon where we focus our attention, perhaps that is a key to how we deal in an invulnerable way, in a tranquil way, in a consistent way with whatever is before us in the moment. Because as Judge, I think, said, this too shall pass. Yeah. Although, again, when we're in pain, it seems like an eternity. Jonathan.
Thank you. So the speaker mentioned in her wonderful talk the idea of that invulnerability is related to viraga, mm-hmm. and also the myth of Prometheus, and because it seems like there's a tendency, there could be a tendency to want to grit one's teeth and say, I'm going to be invulnerable. I'm going to be so strong. That's how strong I'm going to be. That I'm going to be that invulnerable. And but you mentioned viraga and this myth by this initiate, and then you mentioned altitude, right? Something about the altitude that we can get from myths that would pertain to this. I mean, I think you think that, but I was wondering if you could explain that.
That's wonderful. You know, I think altitude, I know it's just a word, but I don't know. I was thinking about something. I know this word altitude. Suddenly, my brain went to something from The Voice of the Silence, where it says the mind needs breadth and depth and points to reach the diamond soul. I think that's what it is. You know, the mind needs breadth and depth and points. What a beautiful phrase in The Voice. No wonder we quote from it constantly. That's why I specifically chose Light of the Pot, because that's another of my favorite devotional books. I've always loved it. But that is so beautiful. You know, the mind needs breadth and depth and points. What does that mean? Maybe I have to go back to page 200 of the Sacred Doctrine and look at that from three-dimensional views, right? Mind needs depth and breadth and points to understand. You know, that's what it is. It's a different vision. That is why this whole thing with Prometheus, with Garuda, you know, we talk about the bird, you know, the Garuda bird, and then Jatayu in the Ramayana. All of them had that vision, but it was like a three-dimensional, four-dimensional vision. And then this whole thing about reality that I was talking about from that the book that was written, that's also a very interesting thing. And it says there in that article, it's quite funny. It says that your brain gets so terribly discombobulated, you feel like you're going crazy. You know, maybe one has to go crazy to get to the point of understanding. I don't know. Sometimes people who are manic say certain things that make a lot of sense to them and even seems to make sense to some of us. So I think it's a different plane of thinking. It's a different way of approaching things, and it's not easy, but it can be done. And it starts with small, something small you can do, like Miluka and was saying also, you know, quoting from Mother Teresa. So I think it can be done. I'm not saying it's easy, but we have the potential. H.P. Blavatsky says that right from the beginning, whether it's in the ISIS or in the Secret Doctrine or wherever she talks about our potential. We have so much within us, and we just have to tap it.
Great. Thank you. You know, you mentioned earlier on, when we pair this idea of altitude that you and Jonathan just spoke on, the idea of the diamond soul, and that brings up all of the associations with the Vajrahata state, that invulnerable, perfect, indestructible state, the state that Krishna talks about in the Gita. And you paired that with page 2, the mind is the great slayer of the real.
Right.
And there is a stage in one's perfections affiliated with the paramitas. You mentioned viraga. Truth perceived, illusion conquered. And that manomaya, Cosmic mind that looks out into the world, that's affiliated with all of those misconceptions and misidentifications, even of the astral element that is liberated and soars and sees and resonates and understands, is still not it. And it's only when that mind which slays the real, that monomaya, begins to turn inwardly, that some of the sacred texts speak of the beginning of invulnerability. And that speaks to the altitude that you and Jonathan are speaking to, because it's an altitude within our very nature, just as the Agnishwatas are in our very nature.
Right.
And so Prometheus, in its own way, is almost like a Christ channel that allows us to, through that sacrifice, constantly reinvest ourselves. Just like his liver is getting eaten over and over, we reinvest ourselves and baptize ourselves, to use a Christian phrase, over and over again in that higher mental state, which makes us invulnerable, but not lacking compassion, as you suggest. So again, just those words contain such a philosophy that is more hopeful, although still difficult to endure, because what it does to our typical way of thinking that we become uncomfortable with.
Right. And it's like dancing on a pin, right? it's a dancing on a pin.
Unless you're smaller than the point of the pin.
Or like the
Then there's
gymnasts.
plenty room.
Yeah, well, they're like the gymnasts who do it in the Olympics. Wow.
Yes.
There's a lot of concentration involved too, That's why Patanjali talks about exercise and dispassion. They bring both together, and it's important. There's a discipline. It requires discipline. And what is that discipline? It's a meditation, but what is that meditation? Not what we hear on YouTube channels, but more something to do with how do we live our lives? How are we examining it? What my professor said was deeply affected me when he said, "Who are you?" That's all he could say. And it was very, very painful because we took it personally. But I then went home and I thought, who am I? Why am I here? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he had those questions in his head. So, yeah, thank
Maybe
you.
he
Thank
was
you.
a real teacher for you at that moment.
Yes.
Because if
yes.
personality is a construct that's put together,
right.
then obviously it's not what we really are.
Right.
But I think Dave has a question for you.
Yeah. Hi, David.
Oh, hi there, Shobha. Thanks a lot. Yeah, Prometheus is one of the great stories. But I think we need to expand it a little bit.
Okay.
Prometheus, we're talking about Prometheus and we're Prometheans, but Zeus didn't stop there. Then he punished humanity.
Right.
And what did he do? He sent Prometheus, his brother, our other half.
Epimetheus, yeah.
Epimetheus and Pandora.
That's right.
And if I understand it right, because Pandora, couldn't help herself, and Prometheus told Epimetheus to stay away from her, but he couldn't help himself, and he married her. He married Pandora.
Right.
Pandora opens her box, and all the evils of the world come out. Right. So I guess if there's a question out of all of this, which is brought out really well in Theosophy, our dual mind. It's the dual mind that was lit up, not just the higher mind. And so we have to deal with hindsight as well as foresight.
Right. She does mention Epimetheus in this, but I'm not going to go there. But I really think Epimetheus is also an important character.
Right.
Because we can look at Shakespeare's tragedies, they're all Epimetheans, right?
Yeah.
After the event, that's why they're tragic. They're tragic heroes, many of them, because they realize after the event. And most of us are like that, after there is remorse. But that's also not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. The problem is when you don't have remorse at all, when you don't feel anything, right? You continue to do what you do without, where the lower manas is getting,
Yeah, that's the vulnerable side, right?
Yes.
Epimetheus is the vulnerable.
Right.
Not the invulnerable.
But you need the two. I really think Epimetheus, I wish I had talked a little bit about Epimetheus too. We make so much about Prometheus, but Epimetheus is also an important character, because of the remorse. The remorse is there, I think that is also an important thing. I made a mistake, to say after the event. That's we call that vulnerable actually in our parlance, right? We say that's a vulnerable person, sensitive person, but actually that's also a kind of standing up for what is right. But that's a wonderful thing that you brought up. Thank you for bringing that up.
And again, I mean, as you say, and perhaps David is suggesting, we really cannot have full insight unless we have both foresight and hindsight.
Right.
When we embrace all time and space, there is no difference between the past and the present in terms of time as we understand it, because we've gotten past that. You mentioned Patanjali, and there is that Ishwaric state that they call the preception state, that comes before perception and conception. And it's a state where, as Patanjali says, the infinity of the universe that exists as a germ in the mind of man is fully available. And so, in a sense, Zeus did us a favor. Like Judas without Jesus Christ, or Jesus Christ without Judas, doesn't work.
Right.
Unfortunately, we need a Judas to betray Christ in order to make that sacrifice real. And so we need a Zeus to get the Pandora's box eventually opened.
Yeah.
Because then Zeus is different from Pandora. And Epimetheus is too, if we're looking at the hierarchy and the arrangement according to the esoteric stories that you were referring to in the SD. And Zeus couldn't open the box, but Pandora could.
That's right.
And it's only because of the afflictions and the obstacles, just like we see today, that conscience awakens to the responsibility of other, which brings us all to that same pot of recognition of sameness.
Yeah.
And so, there's beauty in the myths, and there are levels to perhaps understanding or applying those myths. And so what is good seems bad sometimes, and what's bad seems good.
Right. And it's something, it triggered a thought of something that H.P. Blavatsky says, that woe to those who live without suffering. She says it somewhere, and she talks about the need for us. You go sail through life with everything seeming to be all right. You can turn out to be smug and pompous and feel like, oh, I know what's wrong with these other people, kind of a thing. But I don't think most human beings do have afflictions. Most human beings do have afflictions. And it makes us grow. It makes us strong. It doesn't cow us down. Doesn't have to cow us down. And I think that I love that. I used to always find that when I was young, and I was read that about what H.P. Blavatsky. I think it's in her book of quotations, if I'm not mistaken. So, woe to those who live without suffering. What does that mean? But it means more than what it says there.
And perhaps truly, the more we walk the path, the more empathic we become as we get rid of ego.
Yeah.
We get rid of the limitation that keeps us focused on ourselves, and we open up a wider circle that embraces other, and we feel that pain every day. And so, it's clearly a beautiful dance that brings the awareness of oneness to a reality. But I saw Betty's hand pop up and down, and then Ken.
Yeah.
Betty, did you?
Yeah, I just I read. I mean, I actually enjoy both those stories also, both of Prometheus and of Pandora. So I read that the translation of the Pandora story is has been incorrect, that it's not a box, it's a vase. And it's a clay vase that's decorated like beautifully by the jeweler. And that it's not that she breaks it but she breaks open the vase. And it made me think about how all these religions around the world use the metaphor of shaping humans out of clay, and how a vase really looks like the shape of a human body. I always wondered if the metaphor was the creation of humans, the vase was actually a metaphor for humans ourselves, because then the last thing that was released was Hope, and maybe it was just another story about how, like, because the idea is that the gods might just be like our ancestors, but that there are these other beings that wanted to create us and wanted us to go on even with all the faults. So because I have a friend who, and she gave me a book about Orishas. She studies like Santeria, and then the people there were made of clay. And some biblical translations is the people were made of clay. And I mean, I feel like in the Pista Sophia, even though they don't say it directly, I feel like Sophia becomes the earth, which we talk about as clay. Then there's stardust, that is us. And so all the basic things is like, we're more like the vase than a box. And I almost always wondered, like, Pandora's story is about us more directly than we think. But that's just my 2 cents. I just wanted to put that in because the translations really do change the meaning sometimes.
Thank you, Betty. Yeah, so many ways of looking at it, but which is what H.P. Blavatsky does in this Prometheus. She says Prometheus could be outside, but he's also you. You are Prometheus. She says that, with the struggle between the higher and the lower. So I think it's can be interpreted in many ways.
And clearly, again, as you suggested earlier, I mean, for those that are familiar with the theosophical terminology, the Agniswadas versus the Luna Pitris. Right. The Luna Pitris do represent that star, that clay, that astral substance, that astar, in which that divine fire takes root. And whether we're looking at the divine fire as the monad or as the monastic element that's awakening, because they both have a role. Right. But neither of them are of the earth, of the vase, of the clay. And so clearly, the more we penetrate into these stories, and HPB does give us the suggestion throughout the SD that often the stories are purposefully mixed and confused in order to keep the uninitiated off the path of that which would give them too much information to manipulate the elements in such a way as we do today that just creates more negative karma. So Ken has a question for you.
Okay. Hi, Ken.
Yes, first to say thank you, Shobha, for that really wonderful in which you connect so many different elements and really bring something kind of to my point, something pointed to my attention, which is the idea in the TS to create the nucleus of the universal brotherhood of all mankind. I'm wondering, how do we do that? And then contrasting that to this path of woe. And another perspective I've had as, in my teenage and 20 years of age, a trained scientist, where everyone wanted to be completely dispassionate and have no emotion and just be a pure scientist, quote unquote, pure scientist that's only logical and just dealing with, quote, facts, unquote, from the material reality. What's missing there is not just woe, but I think woe as a symbol for that spectrum of human emotions. And then maybe it's necessary to have that spectrum of human emotions from joy and pleasure and all that sort of thing to pain and sorrow. Because I've been wondering about this path of woe idea. It's like, why do we need to be on a path of woe? And isn't that too much suffering? But I think it really means to be on a path of having, as you were saying and you alluded to having, with Patanjali and the other statements, a full palette of emotional feelings within us, and yet be able to have that viraga like paramita of this passion, but we're not cold-hearted, but like the scientists without no emotions, not cold-hearted, but really have that. I'm wondering, does that seem like the right way of understanding the path of woe?
Yeah, the reason I always bring in the path of woe is it's not an easy path. Just don't think you can get nirvana like this. Prometheus didn't become one in a day. That's why I ended my speech with my, talk with that. It doesn't happen overnight. That's what I meant. I think that's what is meant also in the voice when it says path of woe. But yes, that's why I say theosophy is not a very serious thing where we all have to be straight-laced and, like this. No. It's a lot of fun too. We can make jokes. Nobody's stopping us from making jokes here. But, and I do that. And I think a lot of us enjoy that because that's what it's all about. And Zen stories are full of it, and it's hilarious, some of them. But it's not serious. And I think the path of woe, the reason I bring that up is the path is not so easy. That's what it means. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it's a challenge. And a challenge, it's how you take it. Do you take it as a challenge, or you say, oh my God, this is hard. But I think that's why. But we need all of them. And I agree with you, Ken. We need all of them. We need all the emotions. And we need to understand them and conquer them, right? We can't let them rule us. We can't let any of them rule us. And that's the thing, we are trying to, that's why I said dancing on a pin. I just said that because it's not an easy thing. And, that's why I said meditation is not when you close the door for a little while. It's for the whole day. It's for the whole week. It's for the whole month. It's for the whole year. And sorry, I don't think I'm doing it every moment. I lose it sometimes. And suddenly that creepy voice from the lower manas says something snarky or something or whatever, angry or I don't know. But here's the one thing that we as students of theosophy hope that we do it. We immediately realize, like Epimetheus, have the remorse and the desire to change. Somebody very close to me used to say, the only failure is the failure to try again. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that onward, keep fighting. And like the voice says, the even if you fail, the enemies that you destroyed are not going to come back again, right? Even if you fail, the wounded warrior, somewhere it says that.
Yes, thank you, Shobha. And the other thing that comes to mind as we're talking here is I had forgotten about Zeus's henchmen and Hephaestus being reluctant.
Yes.
And the world of science fiction, which I like a lot, Vulcan in the Roman Empire.
Right.
And Vulcan is the home planet of Spock, who is this scientist in science fiction land who is completely without emotion, except he's half human. So his struggle is to do, I think, that Epimethean, Promethean thing and really encompass his logic.
No, I think I love that play by Aeschylus. And again, there's a lot of doubt whether he really wrote it. There's that whole thing about, did he do it? It's like, who was Shakespeare? I said, I don't care what his name was, but it's a beautiful play because this turmoil, there are two of them, who have no problem, Bia and Kratos. That's the Greek names that I saw. And they have no remorse, nothing. Whereas he feels like, I don't know if I should be doing this, and he's not happy. And I like that. I like those delineation of character that is brought out even in this. It's a very short play. It's a very, very short play, but so effective. And H.P. Blavatsky in those, I think about 10 pages, is so dense with so much information. I didn't go through everything, but just kind of outlined a few. But it's worthwhile reading those pages, 10 pages there.
Thank you. Thank you again, Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you for both for those comments, and they just triggered another thought in this old brain, and that is, what really is woe, other than a sensation that we interpret? And you mentioned that meditation that is always whatever sensation we have, and we're having them constantly. If we focus on it and pierce into the meaning of the sensation, not what we have attributed to the sensation based on convention, we may come to a different understanding. And I say that based on Patanjali, who says the word is not the idea is not the object. And we can infer that the object is not the processes going on inside the skin that presents a cow as an object. And so sensation invites us to follow it to its core, no matter what the nature of the sensation. We can label it anything we want, but it still takes us to a place. And then we have to consider, we talk very loosely about nirvana, but nirvana also has to be a sensation because it is not a negation. And so now we're talking about gradations of sensation, and as I think it was Desiree, that very, very seductive comment that within sound is intelligence and wisdom. And so when we pay deep attention to the sound within our own being as resonant vibrations that we interpret as all of these things outside, forget about that. Again, Manomaya looking out, nope, destroys the real. When we focus on those every moment, every opportunity that we have, whoever's in front of us, whatever they evoke, then they take us to a place. And if nirvana is the quietest of those places, then even those sensations are our friends, because they teach us how to tune in and look deeply within, as opposed to blaming it on something without. So again, all of these ideas are really, as you say, a lifetime's meditation that we're doing, but the question is, are we doing it consciously? The awareness of Epimetheus and Prometheus, as well as Omniepius, that totality is there. Again, human nature is vast and diverse, but really, when you look at it, is it really any different? As APB says, we've been doing the same things for thousands, if not millions of years, and we're still behind the times because we're still doing the same thing. And so do we have to? No, we can use foresight. But again, we get stuck in the same ruts. But any other questions? How many minutes do we have, Jonathan?
You could look at the chat. We have technically 2 or 3 minutes, but maybe.
Okay. I think, okay, there were 2 here that you can comment on, Shoba. One is from, 3. Let me just read those quickly. Eileen, as we have heard in regard to the myth, the liver purifies the blood. Interesting symbolism, as Prometheus's liver was eaten daily and then grows back, indicating a progressive cycle. That's 1. 2, Betty, how would you figure out HPV's real meaning and translate it if it were intentionally obscured? In other words, how do you know when to clarify what's esoteric and not? And then last from Desiree, thank you, Shoba, for bringing this topic to clarity. through the story of Prometheus and through your remarkable talent of storytelling once again, Des. Okay, all yours, and we can wrap.
Okay. I love that liver purifies the blood. Interesting symbolism. Very, very interesting. I would like to look into that. That's a very, very interesting thing. How would you figure out HPB's real meaning and translation? Very hard. This is why we keep studying the secret doctrine, and every time we see new things. And I go back to page 40. I'm sorry I keep saying it like a broken tape recorder, but it is really true. Every time you see something new, if you do, then you're moving, then you're understanding. If not, go back. But again, I think something you said, Eugene, about sound and what Desiree said reminded me of another thing that you've also said, which may be linked to that. This whole thing that comes in the Mundaka Upanishad, that is the shaving of everything, being naked, in the true sense of the term, letting go of everything, the nidanas, the skandhas, the samskaras, the gunas, everything, and trying to find out. That's where that question that my professor said is truly remarkable, who we really are, and maybe this is not who I am. Of course not. This is not who you are. So, I think that's what this whole thing implies. Whatever we are doing here right now.
Thank you. And again, that's a beautiful way to kind of end, because the teachers tell us that the only immortal thing, which means the only invulnerable thing in our nature, is the monad. Yeah. And the 8th stage of the Bhumis in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is that of impassibility, invulnerability. And they explain it in the Lankavatara Sutra as that state of meditative experience as well as life existence, wherein now one has seen the very foundation of one's being. And then, as Patanjali says, all things in the world are but vexations to the one that has awoken to the perfection of spiritual cultivation. So those are wonderful words to end on, or unless you have something else to say, and we can call it a wrap. Well, thank you very much, and
thank you. Lovely, and, thank you.
All are welcome for next week. What's coming up next week, Monica? You said before in the beginning?
Thank you.
HP Blavatsky.
Okie dokie.
We're going to be doing ours on the 3rd. Universal Company will be doing theirs on the 10th, I believe. And we'll be doing ours on the 3rd.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.